Cool. I'm gonna share my screen for just a second and then I'll turn it over, Adrian, to you. But we just have a couple of quick things on the agenda. So just a friendly reminder, Chaos takes a nice long meeting break over the holidays, which I am really looking forward to having some time without a whole bunch of Chaos meetings. So we take a break from December 8th through January 5th. So our next meeting is going to be on January 14th. So just a friendly reminder, and I'll drop some links in the Slack channel to remind people as well. I've also been working with Kaylin and Paul on a funding impact measurement practitioner guide. So, if you're not familiar, the Chaos Data Science Working Group puts together this series of practitioner guides. And so they're guides to help people figure out how to do a thing. So we have one on demonstrating value, we have getting started with contributor sustainability. So I think we've got maybe nine or so guides right now. So this is a whole series of guides. And it occurred to me that it would probably be great to do one on funding impact measurement. So we've been taking the work that we did in the paper that we presented at the Open Forum Academy event, not this year in Rio, but the year before in Boston. And so we've been taking that very academic paper and distilling it down into something that's more geared toward practitioners. So we'd love to get people's feedback on it. So feel free to just drop your comments in the doc, make suggestions. Yeah, so we'd love to have feedback on that. I'll also just do the reminders, which are at the end, and then I can turn it over to Adrian for the rest of the thing. As a reminder, we are having ChaosCon EU January 29th. It's right before FOSDEM, the Thursday before FOSDEM. So ChaosCon on Thursday, the OFE event on Friday, and then FOSDEM on Saturday and Sunday. So it's in Brussels. And then I also wanted to remind people there's a Linux Foundation Member Summit, which is an invite-only summit for Linux Foundation members. But if you submit a talk and it gets accepted, then you can get an invite to this invite-only event. So it's pretty swanky. It's in Napa, and I really like the event because it's small. There's loads of networking opportunities. It's a really great event. But the CFP closes technically December 15th, but it's like at a really weird time that's early in the morning. So I'm just calling it December 14th. So that CFP is closing soon. So if you're interested in going to that event or speaking at that event, now's the time to start thinking about your proposals. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and just turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that since I think Serkan and Dawn has seen a lot of this presentation, to kind of start off with discussion points that we would discuss at the end, but I'm also just copying it into the chat so that while they seem long now that I'm copying it. But some of it is overlapping. So while I'm going through the presentation, it would be good if we thought about it, and then at the end, it would be nice, I think, to just discuss. The first one is on scalability. You'll see that the NGI program is not going to continue after 2027. And I think one big part of it is that they didn't see that kind of scalability, not potential, but I mean, the resources weren't there for these projects to really scale. And I think many of them kind of remained in this community bubble, which in one sense is good. But on the other, and in terms of the digital sovereignty goal of the EU, it now seems like a challenge. The second one is on what should be the kind of balance between funding new features as well as new projects and innovation and versus sustaining existing critical infrastructure, which is very much in the that the EU-wide Sovereign Tech Fund is trying to solve. And the third one is on you'll see that one of our recommendations is to have kind of this lightweight monitoring kind of it could be a form base, it could be something that can be a little bit tracked, but what we're seeing now is that we are missing a lot of data starting from 2018 when the NGI funding program started. And so it would be good if maybe during the whole funding process, some metrics could be already implemented so that one, projects are aware of what's going to be measured and they are not kind of in this blinded by this, and then later on being retrospectively analyzed. And then the fourth is really the multiplier effect, which is what we are trying to do in task 1.3 of the NGI Commons. Um, and I think so far, as we are writing this intermediate report, it is seeming very difficult to capture this. But I think there's something untapped here, or I think from also from our previous discussions, I think that we're seeing that there's something untapped here, where the open source ecosystem could be, with its own inherent characteristics, could be leveraged um, to figure out what would be a good multiplier effect that could be analyzed. And this could be dependency analysis or network analysis. I was very much inspired by Andrew Nesbitt's talk from ecosystems and how we could leverage that data. So these would be kind of, I think, good starting discussion points. And then I'm just gonna share my screen. I'm not gonna be able to see the chat, so um, once I'm done, I'm gonna come back. Okay, everyone can see my screen? Okay, thank you. Oops. Yeah, so these are the discussion points that I put in the chat. And then again, a big shout out to Killian, Paul, and Don and Mirko for giving us a starting point. I always like to give this shout out because this is really the foundation and starting point for both actually Sovereign Tech Agency and what we're doing at the NGI Commons trying to measure funding impact. And so it was giving a very good framework for what we're doing, and it is heavily discussed in the intermediate report as well. So in the end, to really try and understand the context of funding impact, we decided to focus on 5 unique projects from the NGI program, and that is Mastodon, F-Rate, About Code, Mobile NixOS, and Decidim. We did interviews with these 5 projects, desk research to, for example, Mastodon has annual reports. We looked at them, and as well as what we could find from the internet and other research of these projects, as well as metrics analysis, which I'm gonna show here. But I have to say that I think the conclusion is that, and the conclusion of the toolkit as well, is that the metrics really aren't the full picture, and there's so much contextual understanding that we need to have. And probably one of the most important thing is that we can't really attribute any of the changes in the metrics to the NGI funding specifically and to funding generally. I wanted to have this summary slide of the interview findings of the 5 case studies that we had. So what were the kind of patterns that we saw, and were kind of the common in all of them. And one was they very much appreciated the funding coordinator's expertise. So that in the case of NGI, that would be NLNet Foundation, who is responsible for the majority of this funding and to be distributed out, and for being there for the proposals and selecting the applications and then deciding who gets funding. There was also low admin burden. So all of these projects reported that they very much liked that there wasn't a lot of bureaucracy there, and it was a very cooperative process with the funding coordinators. They all appreciated open licensing and thought that it is very much a foundation for this multiplier effect that we are trying to measure. One, in terms of transparency, and of course, it really helped downstream adaptation for other open source projects and the industry as well, but that is very difficult to measure. Visibility and legitimacy sometimes attracted further support, but it definitely resulted in public visibility, and some of the project also felt formally recognized by the EU, which also gave them kind of a confidence to go forward and thinking of their project as important. Sustainability challenges remain. Some of the projects are trying to diversify their funding from individual donations, industry, as well as government funding. So they are trying to figure out strategies to make sure that they are sustainable, because these fundings are mostly, in terms of the NGI, it's mostly micro grants. And of course, when a call is out, they can apply, but if there's no call, and if, for example, here when NGI funding is discontinuing, they don't really have this path to go forward. Attribution is complex. It's very difficult to figure out what the causal effects are. We actually were able to kind of identify them from the interviews when interviewees would say that this is due to the funding. If funding didn't happen, we wouldn't have been able to do this. Our resources would have needed to go to another place. So that's actually where we were able to find some causal effects, but that is anecdotal mostly and is not cannot be seen from the code base. And of course, the traditional quantitative metrics um, are 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 just it is just a very much of a challenge to try to capture these values-driven outcomes. And I think especially in terms of NGI, where NGI's first goals was really to build this trust in the internet where people are freely choosing their different software and applications, as well as having their data private and really just making sure that they are trusting on what they're using. And now there's definitely this shift to digital sovereignty, which overlaps with this goal, but at the same time is now, for example, very much focusing on the scalability effort, which I think in the first set of NGI funding and first period, that might have not been as much of a focus since there it was more about innovation, making sure that we are able to give funding to those who have a new vision of the internet and to be able to implement that and not just have it as a concept where they don't have the resource to actually work on it. This is just a quick, just so that you can see kind of the different footprints of this project. Just the forks, the commits, and some of the metrics that you can easily just get from GitHub. This is from October. And just so that to see that for some of the projects, these metrics are kind of very much different than what's happening in the code base for these different projects. So I now borrowed in the case studies, and I think Mastodon is a very good example because we are very much able to show that correlation does not show causality, and I think this is a very good example of showing how the code base was able to show us something, but not necessarily the impact of the funding. Mastodon received funding for some of it. It was actually more about the maintenance and making sure that some of their features are clean and easily usable. So this was for the groups function, the advanced filtering and moderation tools. They also received funding for the quote posts to implement that in ActivityPub. And then, which actually wasn't part of the NGI database. And during our research, we did realize that the NGI doesn't have a comprehensive database with the start and date and funding amount, exact funding amount. So there wasn't really a, a comprehensive database that we could rely on. And so during the interviews, we also find out that they got 150,000 euros for the Fediverse project. And here I just wanted to show you that although these grants seem like small, but for an open source project where I think Mastodon at that time was operating with, I think, 4 free full-time employees and maybe 1 or 2 people helping in 2022, their personal cost was 80,000. And so I think with this, in comparison with the 35,000, for example, that they got for the quote post, it is we have to be aware that that even though they are microgrants and for compared to the Horizon Europe projects, they are small. For these projects, since they're operating at such low cost, it is a lot. Okay, so we pulled this data thanks to the CHAOSS Ogre tool. So thanks so much, CHAOSS again. Shout out to them. And mined the Mastodon data. The lines of green are the funding period starts, and the red ones are the end dates for that two funding period. And so as you can see, around 2022 October, there was this big jump in changes in lines of code. That was something that we kind of pulled out and saw. This was also the same thing in number of active issues. And actually, right, so that coincides with the end of the first funding period. So we got very happy when we saw this. In number of stars, we're also seeing a big tick there, and in terms of new contributors as well. Now this story very much ended, and when I Googled what happened in 2022 October, and that's when Elon Musk basically took the ownership of Twitter, and so a lot of users then flocked to alternative platforms, trying to find somewhere where they feel it's more private and less dependent on these powerful actors. This is from the annual report of Mastodon 2022. Here they also reported a tick in the monthly active users in November, as well as in terms of their income. A lot of individual donations came in November, which is actually in November was 130,000. And of course, now thinking back to what they got from NGIs again is a comparison to see like how much these grants are relative to other income that these projects get. Then moving to the next example, which is about code. So about code is a software is actually comprising of multiple projects, some databases, some component analysis tools. And so it is a collection of different open source projects, and it is trying to improve software supply chain security and open compliance. They received a lot of NGI funding even up to this date. So you will see that that's actually one of the challenges of trying to see this in the metrics is that we get overlapping periods of funding. And so it seems like About Code was funded kind of continuously from 2022 till 2025. They received funding for the PURL standard, which is going to be really important. It's a package URL standardization, which is actually now used across the software supply chain in proprietary as well as open source project. Also, FastScan, which improved the performance and scalability of the scan code toolkit. And again, some more funding for PURL. And they also receive funding for NGI Search, which is trying to detect and figure out what to do with AI-generated code and how it's going to affect software supply chain security. So all very, very important um, measures here. And of course, they receive some support from some corporate funders as well as Google Summer of Code and Open Collective. And so I wanted to show for About Code and then two other projects some interview findings that are very specific to them. Um, About Code reported that the NGI funding helped them to kind of focus on these complex and resource-intensive tasks they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Some of the other funding that they get is for new features. So here they actually very much appreciated that they kind of received funding for more of a not necessarily maintenance task, but something that's not gonna result in a shiny new thing, but will very much make their lives easier and to be able to deliver on this project. Yes, uh, all of these different sub-projects are targeting specific challenges of software supply chain analysis. They are collaborating on this detecting the AI-generated code, which is funded by the NGI Search Grant, the creation and the adoption of the PURL standard, which is now widely used. It was really showing that they are able to demonstrate broader impact for the whole of the software world. They said that the experience with NGI was highly positive, emphasizing the absence of the unnecessary bureaucracy and the efficiency of the grant process. And they thought that the Anonet team had deep expertise across multiple technical and thematic areas, which kind of was a surprise to them, and they were delighted by it. So some of the metrics here, we try to put them in on one graph, but of course they are different. They have their different ranges here, and you will see that the red bars, which are what happened during funding, and the averages that happened during funding here is very long. It's 41 months. And we looked at monthly averages before funding, which was 6 months. And of course, as we also know from the toolkit, it is just we do have to be aware of the long-term and short-term effect. So currently, we don't have any data after funding since About Good is still being funded. But of course, it is going to be different if we look at 6 months after funding or a year or years after funding. So that is a challenge again here. So we included these metrics in the intermediate report to actually showcase that metrics alone won't be sufficient, and that we did the work and we looked at these data for the different projects, but to be able to really conclude, I would say, meaningful things about the NGI funding specifically is very difficult, and then I don't think should be done. Some more metrics on PR review and issue resolution, which did decline during the funding period. But again, there were so many factors happening during those 41 months. And so in terms of user adoption, we aren't really able to capture that yet, but in the next year of our research, we are very much interested in trying to dig deeper there. And in terms of ecosystem impact, definitely the PRL standard is something that should be emphasized. And the fact that scan code is now integral to SBM generation, and helping organizations comply with regulatory requirements is really important. And of course, this AI-generated code search is also going to be really important, but that I think is going to end in 2027. The next one is Mobile NixOS, which is a very small project. Actually, before NGI wasn't even it had no GitHub repo. It was really a proof of concept that the main maintainer wanted to implement, and thanks to NGI, in the end, they were able to. And so Mobile NixOS is this superset that is built on NixOS and is trying to give an operating system to mobile devices, which is abstracting away these differences between them. So this is really NixOS on your phone, and to get that system running on mobile devices, for example, Android phones. And so the main concept is around these building blocks, which then the end user can configure as they like. And so for this specific project, for them, it was very important that the user can then exercise their four software freedoms, and be able to use the full capability of the hardware that they own through these mobile devices. Yes, so it's the main funding they received is from the privacy enhancing technologies theme of the NGI funding, and that was 50,000 euros. And they also received infrastructure support from the broader NixOS sponsors. And so through the interviews, what we find out is that the mobile NixOS maintainer very much appreciated that since it was a proof of concept first, they themselves weren't sure where this project would be going in the end. And so NLNet was very much happy to adapt to the technical realities that emerged. So if there was a dead end there, then they were happy to then kind of modify the proposal and the OKRs. And so this project went from proof of concept to an entirely new open source project. And this also allowed to this maintainer to make this carrot transition from a proprietary software company into this open source approach where they are now still staying. And the grant flexibility also allowed reallocation of the funds as the different technical approaches proved unviable for some reason. And outside the grant scope, this maintainer also worked on the NixOS boot experience. So it also helped the wider and broader ecosystem of trying to get operating systems on this less dependent hardware like Pinebook and Pinephone. It somewhat separately operated from the core NixOS team and that project. The maintainer reported that it likely attracted new users to this broader ecosystem since some of the users were actually looking for a new operating system for their phones and then realized that, oh, NixOS is an even bigger project and can be applied to other devices as well. So the blue bars would be the ones before funding, but as you can see, before NGI, this project wasn't even existing. And so everything kind of happened after funding, and we reported these numbers. But of course, it is very clear that this project wouldn't have happened without the NGI funding. Also, some of the PR reviews and issue resolution. And yes, currently Bomalix OS is primarily used by enthusiasts and the smaller open source community for the Pi phone and other Linux-capable phones. And the adoption is very much community driven. And here, of course, we are seeing these challenges of trying to scale these projects, which are very much grassroots and coming from the bottom as very much innovative projects. But there has to something else, other resources, new business model, other concepts for these projects to really scale and be able to either be commercially adopted or publicly adopted or just wider end user adopted. Um, and so for the ecosystem impact, as I already mentioned, for NixOS, this was also a bit of a boost here. It was another way where people got familiar with the project. And some of the reusable components were improving the boot and boot chain handling experience. It also allowed experimentation and knowledge sharing within this community. Um, and yes, I also already talked about expanding the overall use base. Okay. And the last one is AppDroid. So AppDroid is a trusted community-driven app store for Android users. It is curating free and open source apps and basically tagging them and labeling them based on whether they are private or what are the kind of privacy scores um, or whether there's tracking within the app. Um, and although the app selection is much smaller than mainstream stores, and may require more manual management, it is highly regarded among privacy advocates and everyone who would like to have a more private and have more control over their digital experience. After it received funding through three different NGI programs. One is the Privacy Enhancing Technologies Fund, one is NGI Discovery, um, and NGI Zero in Trust, which is on reproducible builds, which I try to understand what reproducible builds are, and the maintainer did try to explain it, but the best I got is that, or the best way that I maybe understood it is that it allows these different apps to be fully laid out so that when you're seeing a copy of that app, you know that it is the actual app that was intended by the creators of that app and is not modified, is not tracking anything, is um, privacy enhancing. Um, in terms of the Android interview findings, they do get steady contributions through platforms like Open Collective, LiberaPay, and GitHub sponsors. This can cover their infrastructure costs, but they still need a lot of volunteer contributions who are international teams working on the apps, labeling them. And also, actually, one big thing that Android is doing is filing bugs against major apps. And so, for example, Android had filed a bunch of bugs to Google, and they kept bugging them, and then they finally would correct them and get them fixed. And so these are definitely things that are things that wouldn't show up in the code base. So many of these volunteer efforts and the work that's coming out of AppDroid is not in the code base. It's rather this labeling and filing of the bugs, documentation, and many things that aren't in the code base. And Android is actually hosted on GitLab, so the Ogre tool is not yet able to get metrics from GitLab. So we didn't include that in the intermediate report. Yes, so in the user adoption, Android is very important in regions where there's censorship. Um, and so, though it is, of course, its adoption is not as big as other app stores, it is very much maintaining the strong presence where there needs to be privacy focus, um, and these niche end users who would like to have control over their data. And in terms of ecosystem impact, Everid is actually collaborating a lot with privacy researchers, advocacy groups, and academic teams. So that was something that they reported as maybe something that could be an ecosystem impact where they could collaborate on privacy methodologies and technologies. Okay, and we also put some policy recommendations here. Some of them will be kind of speaking to the discussion points. But so embedding this lightweight monitoring from the outset, and this is also something that we discussed with Paul that the sovereignty agency might want to implement. But of course, the details on this is going to be will need to be very much laid out because there needs to be this balance, of course, between not overburdening the maintainers, but still having some kind of monitoring there. Um, One of our, I think, big conclusions was that it was great looking at the different case studies and for contextual understanding. It was really good to dig deep into one and definitely not generalizing and trying to figure out one metric for this more than 1,000 projects that were funded. But at the same time, looking at these different individual projects shouldn't mean that that specific outlet for that individual project should be taken as something that is the I would say the conclusion of the funding impact. Here it's I think more about the ecosystem level and how these different projects can influence one another and how they can build up really. And that's what I think what's beautiful about open source is how one project can then learn from other and spring out new innovations. And so really one individual project highlighted, I don't think will be able to tell us what the funding impact of this open source ecosystem was. Um, of course, it would be great if there were continued support after these micro grants. This could also mean transitioning them into more scalable, larger projects that can be commercially adopted or more widely adopted. The public sector does have a kind of very important role in this. One of them is procurement, which from the different discussions I'm seeing is a very complex topic, and there doesn't seem to be a consensus on how the current procurement practices should be changed. Some people say that it shouldn't even be changed because you can procure open source without um, with the current measures, but people are just not trusting it enough. They need a support center. They need someone 024 who's there and is able to answer the phone when something's not working, or it's the procurement processes are for 4 or 5 years, which just doesn't allow for these open source projects to really compete there. So there's a lot of discussions to be had there and a lot of research. And also, of course, building the technical capacity within the public sector to make sure that they are able to use these open source projects. And one other conclusion that I really wanted to emphasize so far is that I think it would be great continuing this human-centric and rights-based focus, even though the current sovereignty focus is very much, I think, what's in the spotlight. But I think in terms of the innovation that happened and actually many of the open source projects that I'm seeing are having impact around the world. And for example, for Android, where it is very important for regions where there's censorship, it it might kind of hinder, if we are very much focusing on the European digital sovereignty here, it might hinder these wider, more global efforts. And so, as a conclusion, NGI is very much a flagship example of Europe's approach to build a trustworthy and privacy-preserving internet. And based on the findings that we saw from the interviews and the project, they very much like the cascade funding and the funding coordinators' expertise in helping them get the funding and then guiding them through the process. Okay, so what's next? We do have another year of this NGI Commons project, and for task 1.3, the final report has to be delivered by the end of December next year. So it would be great to explore some of the causal methodologies, which I know will be a challenge, but definitely report on it and what our different insights are there, as well as conduct network analysis, where I think some of this multiplier effect could be seen. This is very much overlapping with the dependency analysis, but identifying clusters of collaboration and reuse of these AGI projects. Um, and yes, assessing the importance of these projects within the wider digital ecosystem through dependency analysis, which is very much at its beginning. It's more it's more about me being inspired by Andrew's Nesbitt's talk. So that will definitely need to be more expanded, and I'm very much looking forward to your ideas on this. Okay, we can now go to the discussion, and I'm gonna stop sharing and look at the chat. Okay. Sorry, it feels like I talk too much.
We have about 8 minutes for questions. It looks like Alexandros has his hand up, so maybe we'll start with that one.
Yes, thank you very much for the great presentation. Really interesting. My first question was about this interview result you talked about. That interviewer said they really liked that it was a low burden to receive funding. My question there is concretely over basically which infrastructure or how did they receive funding? So was it like over donation platforms or like, yeah, but basically concretely that question. And did they also talk about how did they, if they received funding also from other parties, also over which channels? So that was interesting for me.
Okay, thank you, Alexandros. So in terms of the funding coordinators, these funding coordinators on their website, such as NLNet, so you would go into nlnet.org, um, and they would send out these calls for announcements. I think every 2 months. It's actually
Mhm.
quite frequent for these different themes. The open source projects would come and apply, and I believe then a simple contract would be made. And actually, that I didn't mention, which I should have, is that another flexibility of the NGA project is that they can fund individuals, they can fund organizations, nonprofits. So there was actually no constraint on who to fund. So if an individual is its own individual and is kind of in would like to receive the money on their bank
Yeah.
account, it seemed like that's not a problem.
Okay,
Uh,
but the money in the end is transferred by via bank transfer
I
directly
think
to
so.
the. Okay, okay,
Yes.
okay. And
And
did they? Sorry, so sorry.
no, no, go ahead. I wanted to answer your other question.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about.
Okay.
Sorry.
And yes, I know that About Code does have an open collective account as well as I think GitHub sponsor. So some of their individual donations are coming in there. Mastodon might have its own platform from the individual donations. I'm not sure. But so it's I think their strategies is to be there wherever they can, and if it's through these platforms, then be there as well, but
Yeah.
also get it through the government, or maybe they also have an internal individual donations
Okay, cool.
mechanism.
I might have another point later, but maybe let's first ask
No
second.
worries.
Well, no problem. In general, I also have actually a lot of notes about this in general, NGI's work, let's say, on the funding impact. And I'm curious whether do you still do interviews? I think if we can have a proper interview session, we can talk about a lot of details. Again, one of the things that I'm thinking that there is definitely the adoption aspect of these solutions. What do we, for instance, define success of Mastodon, for instance? I think we are always comparing it to maybe Blue Sky or Twitter, but then we always need to compare, again, the revenues, maybe the incomes of these solutions, and then what do we exactly expect from Mastodon? Or what is the problem that we are trying to solve? There are a lot of fundamental questions that we are still not really, I don't think we are answering it properly. But if we will have maybe a separate interview session, if you wish, if you have time, I would love to maybe dive into the details. I mean, otherwise, I have a lot of notes, and again, we have just a couple of minutes left, and it's not going to be enough.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have enough time.
No, it's, I mean, yeah, in general.
But yes,
So if you wish, maybe we can organize something like this. Maybe we can continue on Slack. If anyone else wants to join, maybe Alexandros, you can also join, and then we can dive into the details. But it's again, I think we can extend the conversation at least 30 more minutes.
yes, that would be great. Thank you so much, Serkan,
No problem.
and definitely on the user adoption and what we are going to compare to. I think that is a very crucial question here, and yes, knowing that the resources that these projects have, the UI, the infrastructure support, everything that they have compared to these bigger, well, yes, not open source projects. Yes. Okay, then I'll Slack you and then we can organize
Yeah,
something.
let's do that. Let's do that. Thank you.
I would maybe then add my last point regarding this network and dependency analysis. I think I slightly mentioned it at the end of my talk. I'm trying to work in that direction. So as I understood, it's basically you're beginning towards that topic. So if you want, we could yeah, get in touch. Like I think in February or March, I should already have some deeper insights which might help you going in that direction. So if you want to, we can yeah, get connected during that time period.
That would be amazing. Yes, thank you so much, Alexandros. And I do remember your talk, and that also inspired me into the network analysis that you've done. Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think we have a lot to follow up on because this is a lot of it's a lot of material. It's well, as we know, I mean, we have a whole working group around this. The measuring the impact is not easy. It's a complex task with lots of nuance. The data's not always great. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge. So it's really cool to see how you approached it. And it was also really cool to see how, Paul and the folks at the STA have also approached theirs, which is kind of a similar model, but a little bit different. So I thought that was really interesting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any
And
final comments in our last minute? Anything? Okay. Well, hey, thank you so much, Adrian. This is really interesting. And thank you everybody for coming. And it is recorded, so I'll post the recording once we have it uploaded as well.
thank you. And if there's any discussion points that you'd like to expand on, just feel free to send me a message or in the minutes or maybe not the minutes, but the Slack channel, and we can discuss. And I'm also going to set up those calls. Thank you.
Cool. Are the slides available to post the link in the
Yes.
minutes?
Yes, I'll do that.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
Yep.
Have a great evening, and it was good talking to all of you.
Thanks so much.
Bye,
Cheers.
everybody.
Bye bye.